think that's how we have it lined out in the...
Yeah, I think it's printed in that order.
Yeah, that's how it is. Okay, we're going to get started in just a minute, so if you make sure you get your pizza before we start.
Hey, how are you? I never know if you want me or not, but I'm
always
here.
want
Go with it.
Yeah. That's okay, because John's going to speak first.
Hello.
To welcome the intro.
I'm going to take the microphone for you.
Yeah.
No, I don't think so.
Where are so many people here?
We've got that up there. I was just going to say, I'll show that.
Yep.
I'm going to grab some and have them
Yeah.
back in pizza so people can do that.
I think we have to.
Double check. No one has any sort of presentation PowerPoint, anything you just projected for today?
I'm pretty sure that's not the case.
No.
Cool.
Selling, I think it's very important. It's very proud. People are looking at it. Did you get nervous?
Ready? All right. And then I'll just turn to you. Perfect. All right, well, good afternoon. I think we'll get started. My name is John Kenyon. I'm the director of the Iowa City UNESCO City of Literature organization. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon for this panel. Normally, Chris Merrill would be up here doing the introduction, but Chris always very graciously allows me to speak when this panel discussion falls during the Iowa City Book Festival, which we produce each fall. And the festival, when we have IWP events that overlap with it, we love to include them as part of our schedule, which we have done today. And then we also love to have IWP writers take part in some of our other events. So if you have one of these book festival programs in hand, you can consult that. There's some on the table by the door, and I even put some back by the pizza. So one way or another, you should be able to get some. But in here, you can see all of the events still to come. We've had some wonderful events so far. We have probably 25 more events to come over the next 3 days, including a panel discussion on Saturday afternoon at the Masonic Building, which is right down the street here, that will feature some IWP writers. And then the normal Sunday reading that takes place at Prairie Lights is also part of the schedule. And you can see more of those things in your program. You can also find that for those who may be watching online at iowacitybookfestival.org. And you can also see the many other events that are still to come on the festival. So welcome to all of you. Thank you for being here in Iowa City and taking part in this amazing event, for IWP for letting it be part of the book festival, and to Chris for always being such a wonderful partner of ours. So now I will turn it over to Chris Merrill, who will introduce the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, John. It's always a thrill for the IWP to be part of this festival. Welcome to the Friday Panel series of the International Writing Program's 2025 Fall Residency. For those of you who are new to our programming, we've given our writers a topic to consider and present to you today. To learn about this year's cohort, visit iwp.uiowa.edu, where you can find their biographies and writing samples and a schedule of our upcoming events. There is also pizza in the back for those in-house, and that is generously provided by International Programs. And now for today's panel, Trials and Tribulations of Literary Translation. Literary translation is not so black and white. What makes or breaks a quality translation? These essays explore personal experiences with literary translation and the challenging task of changing or muting unique cultural expressions to fill a broader audience. I'm going to depart a little from my usual rather spare introductions to read you something that George Sirtzis, the fabulous Hungarian-British poet and translator, posted this morning on Facebook. And I asked for his permission to read this to you because it is, I think, close to the center of what we'll be talking about today. It's called The Death of the Translator. It is unique. It hasn't happened yet, but he is the translator of Laszlo Krasznahorkai, who won the Nobel Prize yesterday, and he writes, "The number of posts I have written on LK's winning of the Nobel Prize almost qualifies as one of his long sentences," and indeed, his wonderful novel, The Melancholy of Resistance, is a 300-page long single sentence, and it is absolutely delightful. This morning, I have been finding articles about it. I don't often find myself so closely associated with the prize, albeit mostly as a footnote, or not even that. Papers like The Guardian and The Times and many others don't mention any of his three main translators, Atle, Moltsev, John Bakhti, and myself, though when a translator is mentioned, it tends to be me, probably because I translated the breakthrough books. And it may occasionally be mentioned that the text as you read it in English was actually written by the translators. The words you see are theirs, not the original authors, though. Of course, they couldn't have existed without the masterful original author. LK himself has said the same. I don't mind too much. It has been said that a good translation is one where you don't notice the translation at all. A translator should be self-effacing, which is true but unnecessary, since others are perfectly happy to do the effacing for you. So that's worked out well. In tribute to this, I will repost this piece published in the White Review some years ago, and it's called The Death of the Translator. It comes in 10 very short parts. 1, the translator meets himself emerging from his lover's bedroom. So much for fidelity, he thinks. 2, je et un autre, said the translator. Try next door. 3, the translator was looking down his own throat. Come out, wherever you are, he pleaded. The translator's wardrobe was full of other people's shirts. At least they fitted him. The translator stood in front of the window pretending to be transparent. But if everything is potentially everything else, complained the translator, what am I doing here? The translator was counting his chickens, none of them hatched, but all already squabbling. 4, the translator wanders into Babel and books himself into a cupboard. 2 languages on the same floor of Babel. I was here first, I'm not talking to you, keep the music down. You call that music? But the gardens of Babel? Who talks about them? Who planted them? Who tended them? Cried the translator in his cups, slurring his words. 5, the blind translator had developed his sense of smell to an exquisite pitch. He could read books the way a dog reads lampposts. The blind translator felt his way through the book, knocking whole sentences over. He'd have to build it all again by touch. 6, a poet and a translator walk into a bar. Give me a beer, says the poet. I suppose you'd better give him a beer, says the translator. The translator was admiring his dead poets. Not that I am alive myself, he remarked, but at least I keep moving. Several lungs, several breaths, several sets of teeth, several lips. We are several, says the translator. We are several, echoes the poet. 7, the lamentations of the translator, pondered the translator. Dirge, plaint, interpreter, let's just call it the giraffe's birthday. The translator was tracking the bear, but kept wondering why the bear was wearing his shoes. Bears are thieves, he muttered. 8, Two translators meet each other, examine their teeth. Whose teeth are those, they ask. To meet a room full of translators, said the doctor, is like meeting a charnel house of saints, everyone a Saint Teresa. They lined up the translators and shot them. Which one was the poet, asked the soldier. Fourth one along, maybe fifth, not that it matters. The translator lay dead, but they buried someone else. Then they brought in someone else. The translator's arthritis was killing him. The dead lay round the room like a compound of his own glittering bones. 9. We are legion, says the devil. We are the foreign legion, answers the translator. 10. Pentecost, Schmentecost, shrugged the translator. Just give me the crib. Our format is the same for this panel. I'll introduce the writers going down the list. They'll each give a brief presentation, and then we'll open it up to questions. Lindsay will be wandering around with the microphone. Please don't begin asking your question until she reaches you with that microphone, because we want to be sure that the audience watching on YouTube can hear you. Immediately to my left is Kazem Ali, who's our Ida Cordelia Beam visiting distinguished professor, and he'll be involved in a lot of things over the coming days, which I hope you will attend. He's a poet, novelist, and essayist whose work explores themes of identity, migration, and the intersections of cultural and spiritual traditions. His poetry is known for its lyrical and expressive language, as well as its exploration of themes such as love, loss, and the search for meaning in a rapidly changing world. Sukun means serenity or calm, and a sukun is also a form of punctuation in Arabic orthography that denotes a pause over the consonant. This sukun draws a generous selection from Hazem's 6 previous full-length collections and includes 35 new poems. It allows us to trace his passions and concerns and take the measure of his art, the close attention to the spiritual and the visceral, and the deep language play that is both musical and plain spoken, and we will be hearing from that portfolio of writings over the week. Next to him is Thomas Downey, fiction writer, translator, and screenwriter from Argentina. He's the author of 3 short story collections and a novel. His first book, translated into English, Diving Board, was just released this October and is available for sale at Prairie Lights. He's the winner of the Fondo Nacional de las Artes Prize for a short story collection and the Maria Elena Walsh Foundation Literary Prize, among others, and the recipient of grants from a variety of foundations. He's currently working on his second novel, Coma. His participation in the fall residency is made possible thanks to the generous support of Hugh F. Culverhouse Jr. and other donations made to the international program. Finally, to Tomas's left is Florencia del Campo, who comes from Argentina and Spain. She's the author of 4 novels. The first one, The Guest, in 2016, for which she was a finalist for the Premio X de Novela Prize. The second was My Mother. And the third, the foreign edition, won the El Premio Internacional de Novela Ciudad de Barbastro. Her most recent novel is To Have a House. It won the Premio Brutal Best Novel of 2024 in Spain. She's also published several poetry collections and children's titles in Spain, and her participation in this fall residency was made possible by an endowment grant from Paul and Walling Engel Fund. On to Kazem. You can sit or stand.
Stand. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here with you in Iowa City and as part of the International Writing Program offerings. I'm very grateful to Chris for including me in the programming over the years, and hopeful that we can all in this room and beyond do everything we can to preserve a strong, vibrant, robust future for the International Writing Program in light of the funding losses that many literary nonprofit programs are facing right now. including my own Nightboat books. So thank you, Chris. I want to talk about three, it's not a good thing that I'm going first, because I want to talk about the Iranian poet Sohrab Sepehri that I worked on translating, and I want to talk about my talk's going to be super practical. I'm not going to talk about ideas about translation very much. I think in the field of translation, there's some tension between folks who have ideas about translation and folks who actually translate. Oftentimes, we think that translation is impossible, and it is until it isn't, until you actually have to do it anyways. And I think anybody who's been lost in a foreign country where they don't speak the language well, when you're on the corner trying to get directions or food, whatever theories you have about the possibilities or impossibilities of translation don't really matter very much. You just have to make yourself understood. And so that's at least part of what we do as translators is we try to make ourselves understood as translators in the language that we're translating from, and to bring that work into English. In other words, I do think that translation is a two-way street, and I don't think a translator comes out of the act of translation unscathed. So I want to talk to you about three instances of translation in the poems of Sohrab Sepehri where I actually didn't translate the words or the phrases. Each of these lines contains a very culturally specific Arabic word or phrase, mostly to do with religious texts, so those Arabic words are going to be used in the Farsi. It's hard to find an English equivalent. It may be in the Jewish community where people use Hebrew words there and they don't translate into English, or for example, in an older time in a Catholic Mass where you would use Latin words and you would know what those words were. So these are Arabic words used in Farsi that any Iranian person would have known what those Arabic words mean. So if they're foreign words or words from another language in the original that you're translating from, how precisely do you translate them? Of course, English is a forgiving language when it comes to the multilingual. We already use many words from other languages, most frequently in the arenas of food and clothes. For example, we don't translate the word for sari, we just call asari asari. If we're eating paella, we don't translate it into, or risotto, we don't translate it into something else, we just use that word. So in those two arenas, it's quite common to just incorporate words from other languages. And occasionally, those types of concepts that are not easily translated will become words in English, like chic, the word chic, or the word macho. It means its own thing and becomes a word in English. There are other words that are like a little less common, like schadenfreude, for example, or saudade from Portuguese, where they're less commonly used. Those other words are completely, commonly known. Any person who speaks English probably knows what they mean. The other words, they're still making their way into the language. Food and clothing. So I wanted to talk about these three instances in Sohrab Sepehri's poem, Water's Footfall. So he is a 20th century Iranian poet born in 1928. He passed away in 1980. He passed away young, at 52 or 51, not having yet turned 52, of cancer. And he passed away in the early days of the Islamic revolution, or the revolution against the Shah had already happened, but the full kind of takeover by the more fundamentalist elements of the regime hadn't happened yet. But he was certainly, as a Muslim person, writing against the grain of religious orthodoxy. And he was very influenced, for example, by the American beats. In particular, he was influenced by Allen Ginsberg. And in 1965, which is about 10 years after Howl came out and had already by that time been translated into Farsi, Walt Whitman was also a very big, and translated into Farsi, was a big popular American poet in Iran at the time. So he's familiar with all of these American poets. And he wrote a long poem called The Water's Footfall. And at the beginning of The Water's Footfall, he's kind of invoking religious ideas, but he's doing it iconoclastically. So one of the most, and he's invoking the kind of structure of the Muslim call to prayers, the call to prayer and the prayers themselves. So the first line I want to talk about is a very famous line of Sepehri's. In fact, are there any Iranian people in the room, by the way? I do a little test whenever I meet an Iranian person. I am part Iranian, but whenever I meet anybody, you know, I'm at IWP and my Lyft driver, somebody is Iranian, I will ask him if he knows this line and I'll recite the line to him. And everybody knows it. It's like a very, very famous, commonly known line. It goes, Man Musalmanam, Qiblam ek gol sork. Man is the personal pronoun I. The at the end of Musalman is the verb. In Farsi, you have subject, object, verb. So the verb's at the end of the sentence, as in Urdu and not as in English, no, because you have the verb in the middle, right? And Musalman, of course, is the word for Muslim. So Man Musalmanam is simply something like I am Muslim, or you could say I am a Muslim. Of course, nothing's ever equal in translation, and saying I am Muslim and I am a Muslim are, you know, tonally very different. So you're already making a choice with the smallest little movement. And one of the translators that I looked at, Pune Shabani Jadidi and Prashant Keshavmurthy, who did a team translation, actually said, I'm a Muslim, with a contraction. And that too is different. It feels different. Qibla, it gulsarg, the second line, is a lot harder to render. Qibla is one of those culturally specific words that I was talking about. It means the direction to Mecca, the direction in which you would pray. So if you were in the Muslim world, even when we were in Sri Lanka, I don't know if you guys looked up, but in India and in Bombay, if you're at the hotel and you look up at the ceiling, there's normally an arrow painted on the ceiling. In any country where there's a lot of Muslims, I mean, there's a lot of Muslims in America too, we don't do it here. But in India and Pakistan and in any countries in the Muslim world, you're going to see this. Sometimes even in Israel, depending on what part of the country you're in, you're going to see this. An arrow painted on the ceiling pointing in a certain direction. That's the Qibla. It's the direction to Mecca. It's the word for that. It doesn't mean anything else. It doesn't have another second meaning, and there's nothing else that means that. It's just a very, really specific word. The closest analogous directional word in English might be the word orient, which at some point meant to find east, but no longer really means that. Even if you're lost in the woods and you say, I have to orient myself, it doesn't always mean I have to find east. It just means I have to find myself. It's lost that meaning, right? And it's more commonly not even that anymore. It's more commonly like freshman orientation, or I'm going to get my orientation at work, right? It means something different than what it used to mean. That's an example of a word that leaves behind its first meaning and finds a new meaning, even though it's like in the same category of things. So in order to translate the line properly, you have to think about what Sepehri meant. First of all, Qibla is not normally modified by a pronoun. It's just the Qibla. It's not my Qibla, or what's your Qibla, if I was to ask you that. There's only one Qibla, because Mecca's only in one place. Do you see what I mean? So from the very beginning, when he says Qiblam, it's like weird. When I show this line to people who know Farsi or but don't know the line, they kind of get confused. They don't know how to read it. They're like, what? I don't understand. What is this word? Because qiblam, my qibla, is like not a word. It's not a thing. It's like an invented word. I show it to them because I tattooed it on my arm after I finished the book, which is that's how I show the cab drivers and everything, the poem. It's just very easy to find. It's just, yeah, so. Where are we here? Okay, so the qibla, you wouldn't say my qibla, but Sepehri is making a point. His qibla isn't towards Mecca. His qibla is in a different direction. Qiblam ik gulsorg. My qibla is the red rose. So you could do it exactly like that. My qibla, with like an italicized on the my perhaps, is a red rose. There's no verb in the sentence though, so maybe the closest or tightest, we shouldn't say closest because nothing's close in translation. Maybe we should say narrowest. The narrowest translation would be my qibla, a red rose. No verb, right? So I do like that rendering. That is the rendering that Pune Shabani Jadidi and Prashant Keshavmurthy did in their translation. But it doesn't reveal the sheer audacity of claiming a personal qibla. And at that, one so humble as a flower. So it's audacious for two reasons, right? It's audacious to say my qibla in the first place, and it's furtherly audacious to say it's a flower. And it's not like any special flower, it's any flower. My qibla is a red rose. There's no direct object in a definite, getting my terms confused. There's no definite article in Farsi, the, this, the, that. It's implied if there's not an indefinite article. So if you don't have a, then it's automatically definite. It's left out. But in this case, there is the indefinite, ek, which means a, but it also means one. It means both. My qibla is one red rose. My qibla is a single red rose. My qibla is a rose. Like, do you see what I mean? Like, you start to, there's a little bit of quiver. These differences are microscopic, but the understanding of the line, and it's such a powerful line. I did something awful with it. You're gonna, I think it's like the one single line that I think might be a mistake in my whole translation, or it's the best thing that I did. But I went wide with my interpretation. I wanted to get at that declarative iconoclasm of the line. So I decided to invert the grammar, first of all, and then I used a definite article, which is not in there. There is no the in that sentence, but there's no the in Farsi. So I thought, I think I can do this because I'm trying to get the sense of the line. What I did instead was, I am a Muslim, the rose is my qibla. And that was him sort of like making this statement of a ballsy, bold, declarative statement. So my choice was to translate the implications of the original line, not the direct word order, which, as I said, is not important at all because in the first place, Farsi is a language that doesn't follow the word order of English, so I don't get really caught up in that word order. I feel the same way about translating punctuation. Punctuation is used differently in all different types of language. So I don't have a problem if there's a sentence in French that has like 1 comma in it, and I've translated into an English sentence with 6. It's probably the other example would be better. If it has 6 commas in French and I've translated to only have 1, it doesn't really, I don't lose sleep over that, For that matter, there are signs in punctuation in Spanish, like the inverted question mark at the beginning, that you don't even have in English in the first place. The last one I want to I'll look very briefly at, the second and third lines of a longer passage later down in the same page. Well, I want to say one more thing about the I'm a Muslim, the contraction that Pune Shabani Jadidi did, which is it is a much more conversational register, and throughout the poem A Water's Footfall, Sohrab Saperi switches between a very personal register and the very lofty register. So to say qiblam, for example, my qibla, is like a weird personalization. He also later on, a couple of lines after that, talks about God, but he talks about God like one of his buddies. He's like, God's hanging around here somewhere. Like, he uses human pronouns for God, so it's like a weird moment of like magisterial diction and register and super conversational casual. It's one of the things that's amazing about Ginsberg too, in those long, oratorial, declamatory type of poems. So in the second and third line of the longer passage that I want to talk about very briefly is Saperi talks of making his own prayers after the call to prayer is chanted, but not by the muezzin. He says the call to prayer is chanted by the wind. The word he uses for the call to prayer is the Farsi word azan, which is the Farsi pronunciation of the Arabic word adhan, which you might have heard. It's not commonly known in English. Shabani Jadidi translates this using the phrase call to prayer. And the other translation that I looked at calls it the call, after the wind chants the call. I actually wanted to use the word azan precisely because it was not a familiar word in English. And I started to think about those words like sari, like the food words and the clothing words like samosa and all of those type of things. I started to think about them, and I started to think, why shouldn't we start to have, instead of saying call to prayer, why shouldn't we say azan? So I left it as azan in the translation itself. It was a small little moment of linguistic, just kind of, let me be one of the maybe 100 writers this year that just uses Farsi words in English. And then maybe next year there'll be 500. And then maybe there'll just be some Farsi words that we use in English anyways. That was the general idea. In the same line, Saperi describes the grass reciting the Takbir al-Ihram. Takbir al-Ihram as a phrase is the word for the chant Allahu Akbar. So what I mean is, the golden rule is do unto others as you would have them do unto you, right? But it's called the golden rule. So the Allahu Akbar chant is called the Takbir al-Ihram. And oftentimes in Muslim spaces, someone will shout out Takbir, and everyone in the group will say Allahu Akbar, or shout it out like that, right? So neither Shabani Jadidi nor the other translator, Shahid, used the term Takbir al-Ihram. They both instead used the term God is great, which is the normal English translation for the phrase Allahu Akbar. But I think Allahu Akbar itself is common enough to English-speaking audiences, so I chose to retain it untranslated as Allahu Akbar. And Muslim people in the room know this is a little obscure. We don't have time to get into it. But God is not a really good translation for Allah. It's a little more complicated than that. And Akbar, the word Akbar, does not actually mean great, quote unquote. So God is great as a translation for Allahu Akbar is an incorrect translation. That's a whole other 45-minute long talk. And now I'm going to say I'll just close on this last little bit. Oh, okay. All right, so there is one last piece of all of this that's in your little written document. You can take a look at that, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
And just a reminder for our audience at home, these presentations will be loaded online so you can read them at your leisure. Shilmaz?
Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Qasim. That was really interesting. And thank you, Florencia, in advance also. Thank you, Chris, for presenting us. Okay, so rather than an essay with smart takes, hypotheses, or profound analysis on the subject, this is going to be an account of my own personal experience as a translator. A confused, slightly desperate, and mostly pessimistic account. So bear with me, please, because I'd like to begin with a confession. I think I've had enough. 3 weeks ago, I finished working on the translation of an 800-page novel, The Book of Love by Kelly Link. When they first offered me the job, I was thrilled. I love Link's work, and I had already translated one of her short story collections. Stranger things happened. But the problem was my editor, always in a rush, wanted me to do it in 6 months. I persuaded her to give me more time because I really wanted to take it on, and we settled on 9. Of course, I ended up taking 12. A full year in which I had to put many personal projects on hold, find excuses for my friendly but anxious editor's inquiries, spend Sunday mornings working on revisions, or find myself dissociating at social events, thinking about how to reproduce the anachronistic way some characters spoke, or whether I should use footnotes to explain this or that wordplay. A full year, one could say, under another writer's shadow, trying to peek inside someone else's mind, and not knowing whether to complain because I couldn't devote all the time I wanted to my own stories, or to be thankful for having an excuse not to. But the main issue is, even after a year of working on it almost every day, I'm still not happy with the version I submitted. If I had the time, and if my editor had the time, I'd keep working on it. What I'm trying to say is that translation, from the translator's point of view, is an impossibility. The final version will always be flawed, clumsy, just an attempt at achieving a utopia. It is important, even necessary, like building bridges, but it's also deeply frustrating. Back to the Book of Love. As I said, I love Link's work, and I've been waiting for her novel for a long time. But after accepting the job, I realized I would have loved to read it just for fun, and maybe just once instead of 5 or 6 times, without having to squeeze my brain trying to reproduce her wit, her fantastic humor, her musical rhythm, and her constant winks to the reader in Spanish. A language somewhat more nuanced than English and, for that same reason, a bit slower and less snappy. When I talk about translation, I often use the verb trasvasar, which refers to pouring a liquid from one container into another. It's a strong metaphor because liquids have a definite volume and an indefinite shape, qualities that I think apply to a literary text in translation, but also mainly because it's impossible not to spill some of the contents in the process. Just picture 2 bottles, probably of different sizes, colors, and shapes, with really small mouths, and there's no such thing as a funnel. So, whenever I translate a book, it's hard not to end up hating it. Well, maybe I don't hate the original, just my own version, but things tend to get mixed up. And that brings up some important questions. When we talk about a translation and its original, are we actually talking about the same book? How much of themselves does a translator put into a translation? Is the translator also an author? Where's the limit to the liberties they can take? These open and rhetorical questions are the ones I often ask myself while working. They are the reason I find translation so interesting and so complicated, like a kind of puzzle. Just as when I'm writing my own stuff, aren't translations also my own stuff? I need to approach the job with a quiver of doubt, with a sense of vertigo. I can't write any other way. Translating demands a lot of work. You never finish on time, you're never happy with the final result, and it often goes unnoticed. Publishers have begun in recent years to put the translator's name on the cover, yes, but check some reviews of translated books and see how much they say about the translation. Not about the translator, but about the work itself, what it implies, how much it can change a book for better or worse, etc. It even pays terribly. At least in Argentina, you can't make a living solely from literary translation, not even close. Yet despite all this, I keep doing it. I spent the last 6 or 7 years translating one book after another, around 12 so far. And every time I finish one, I promise myself to take a break. But then I get an email with a new offer, I think about it for a day or 2, and I end up saying yes. Why? Because translating is like writing with both hands tied behind your back. It's an amazing exercise that forces you to face problems and find solutions within a very tight space. You don't have the room to try something new. You can't delete a paragraph or even a sentence you're struggling with. You can do whatever you want as you would with your own book. You're still writing, but you have to follow a narrow path. You can color a bit outside the lines from time to time, of course, but only as an exception. It's also the best way to fully experience and understand the book, like dismantling a mechanism to see how it works and reassembling it again. It teaches you patience. It reminds you that language is slippery, imperfect. I think of it as a workout. Just as marathon runners train before a race, translation keeps me in shape. There's also something fascinating about it. As fascinating maybe as watching a train speed directly toward you while you're standing in the middle of the tracks. And that's why there are so many essays reflecting on the task. People have been writing about it for hundreds of years, but I'm thinking of some recent examples. Kate Briggs' This Little Art, Shen Calleja's The Life Art of Translation, and 2 excellent Argentine books, La Madre de Beckett tenía un burro, Beckett's Mother Had a Donkey, by Matías Batistón, and Se Vive y Se Traduce, One Lives and One Translates, by Laura Whitner. All of them are in some way diaries. Why diaries? Because translating is an experience. It's not so much something you do, but something you go through. Just like writing, it seeps into your everyday life. It's not a 9-to-5 job. You are working on it all the time, even when you're not. Another characteristic shared by these books is that their tone is often tragicomic, and that they can also be read as self-help books for translators. We are all insecure about it. Wait until they find out that all translations are absolutely full of bullshit, writes Calleja. And we all face the same kind of problems, the ones that don't have satisfying solutions. You just have to take a bet, and you're never going to win. As for my own experience, I started by accident. My first translations were just experiments. I've always read a lot in English, and I translated some short stories I loved that weren't available in Spanish, and wanted to share with some friends. One of these friends, also a writer, ended up working for a publishing house that was starting a new collection of translated books. He was recruiting translators, so he called me and asked me if I wanted to give it a try. I happily said yes, not knowing he was putting a curse on me. After that first book, Jamel Brinkley's A Lucky Man, a huge challenge that taught me a lot, I got other offers and I just kept accepting them. Suddenly, it became one of my main occupations. In the past few years, I've learned a lot from my mistakes. Just to give an example, when I began, my tendency was to make the reading experience as smooth as possible, which usually meant simplifying some things to keep readers from pausing or getting confused. I call it ironing. I didn't want any wrinkles whatsoever. Nowadays, although that remains a guiding principle, I realized that I was somewhat wrong, and I've stopped trying to pretend the text I'm working on isn't a translation, simply because it is, and the reader knows that. Reading a translation isn't the same as reading something in its original language and context. That makes everything even more complex because there are no preset answers. It varies in every case and depends on many factors, but it's also a more honest way to approach the task. I started this piece saying that translation takes time from my writing, but I have to admit I was being a bit dramatic. That's not entirely true. While working on my third or fourth translation, a short story collection by M. Sean Harrison, an elusive and mysterious writer, another big challenge, one morning I began, without having planned for it, to take some notes for a novel I've been thinking about for quite some time. These notes became the beginning of a draft, and for a couple of months, I took a few hours away from translation and devoted them to this new book. I finished it last year and it was published a few months ago. It's called Lopez Lopez, and it's my first novel after 3 short story collections. Then the same thing happened while working on Link's translation. A new story for a novel just came to me, and I began working on it a couple of hours a day. That became the draft of what I hope will turn out to be my second novel, Coma. I'm working on it right now. I'm working on it right now here in Iowa. So in the end, has translation really kept me from writing my own stuff, or has it actually pushed me to do so? Next time I get an email from an editor with a translation proposal, if I do, I'll probably tell myself, don't do this to yourself, come on. But I'll sigh, and I won't reply right away. I'll think about it for a day or two, do a little research on the book, make some optimistic time and financial calculations, and who knows, I might say yes. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. I love this table because I'm going to talk from the other side, I guess. I don't know. Let's see. One, I feel like an imposter because I am on this panel, but I don't work as a translator. Now that I say imposter, it comes to my mind the book La Impostora by Nuria Barrios, Spanish translator and writer. She says in that book, translation is a fiction based on true linguistic events. 2. When I was flying from Madrid to Chicago on my way to Iowa, I watched a documentary about the music in Scorsese's films. At some point, he said that cinema is itself like music anyway. You create a rhythm. I think it's the same with writing, music. You create a rhythm. When I think about the difficulty of translation, I believe a key question is how to translate that music. We might think this becomes more evident when talking about poetry versus prose, but I don't think that distinction is necessary. 3. The other day, I was teaching a course about the relationship between mothers and daughters to a group of students, and we analyzed a poem by Sharon Olds called 3510. The last 2 lines of the poem say, it's an old story, the oldest we have in our planet, the story of replacement. This is the original version. Of course, I teach in Spanish, and we read the poem in that language. The Spanish version of the poem I read that day says, es una vieja historia, la más antigua de nuestro planeta, la historia del reemplazo. This version is online, but it does not mention the translator. I had to tell my students that there are at least 2 more versions. Es una vieja historia, la más antigua de nuestro planeta, la historia del relevo. This translation was done by Oscar Curieses. Es una vieja historia, la más antigua de nuestro planeta, la historia del testigo, translated by Almagro Iglesias and Jiménez Arribas. But one student added that he knew another version. Es una vieja historia, la más antigua de nuestro planeta, la historia de la sustitución, translated by Inés Garland and Ignacio Di Tullio. So replacement has been translated as reemplazo, relevo, testigo, and sustitución. If I check replacement in DeepL, it translates it as reemplazo, where reference.com gives repuesto, recambio, reemplazo, sustitución, suplente. ChatGPT tells me that replacement is reemplazo or sustitución. But translation, beyond dictionaries and machines, needs soul. That's funny. I'm using this example to show that a single word contains many possible translations, but the specific word I'm using literally means something related to replacement, that is, a thing that takes the place of something else, or the act of replacing one thing with another, Cambridge Dictionary. It almost sounds like the very definition of translation, doesn't it? 4, translation. Transfer, transformation, transition, transport, transit. Let's play with the trans words. Transparent. What could a translation make transparent? Is it possible for a translation to reveal something about the original in a transparent way? Isn't a translation necessarily somewhat opaque, shrouded in darkness? And Carson said that a translator is someone who gropes for the light switch in a dark room. 5. My writing is full of puns. My latest collection of poems, for instance, is called El Hombre del Padre, literally the man of the father. I'm playing on Jacques Lacan's El Nombre del Padre, literally the name of the father, which also takes us to the Christian rite in the name of the father. In Spanish, the difference is a single letter, a single sound. Hombre, man, nombre, name. In English, the man of the father does not give us any hint. We may console ourselves thinking that music is secondary. There is the meaning what matters, but is it? Something is inevitably lost in that transit, something is gained too. 6. In the book Desertar, a dialogue between the Argentine-French translator Michael Gomez-Woodhart and the Argentine writer Ariana Harwicks, living in France for many years, he says, "It seems naive to think that a text rendered in another language could remain the same. I'm convinced that you aren't the same person when you speak or write in another language, right? I believe the same thing happens with any text in any language. I've noticed more than once that I don't have the same personality depending on the language I am speaking or writing." She replies at some point, "I wouldn't want my translated novels to be my illegitimate children. Perhaps if I didn't live in another language, I wouldn't have this kind of relationship with my translated books, and I could see it as someone else's effect, as what it really is, another person's writing." 7. Perhaps if I didn't live in another country, I've been living in Spain for many years, though I was born in Argentina, I would not have this kind of relationship with my writing, but the truth is I do. In the foreignness of language, I find the literary, or the other way around. When I speak of the literary function of language, I am necessarily speaking of its foreignness. It is never what one wants to say, the mother tongue castrates, said the Argentine poet Alejandra Pizarnik. Is writing itself then a form of translation? Clarice Lispector said, when writing it again, the only seemingly paradoxical certainty is that what makes writing difficult is having to use words. Clarice Lispector wrote that idea in Portuguese. So I ask, is writing itself a kind of translation, one that can in turn be translated? Deleuze summed it up. The writer invents a new language, a foreign language in language. If translation is another person's writing and a translator is a writer, I agree. Let me say that a writer is a translator. 8. Once I worked as a babysitter. One day, the little girl I was looking after and I were playing shopping for groceries. I was the shop assistant, and she came to the butcher's to buy sausages. How many do you want? 4. Then to the greengrocer's to buy carrots. How many do you want? 3. Suddenly, the girl said, but the game was the mom does the shopping, and I forgot the kids. I told her not to worry, to go to her room to get some dolls and come back. She answered, no, better let's start the game over, and the mom goes first to the kid store. The kid store, that's lovely, isn't it? The girl and I were speaking Spanish. The shop's name were Carnicería, carne means meat, verdulería, verdura is vegetables, so that's the greengrocer, and hijería, hijo means children. So hijería, of course, the store where mothers can get their children. Why not? I'm telling this in English to check how different the story sounds if I tell it in another language, and to see how children invent words. They are the first ones that need to translate the word into language. 9. Language. I once had a boyfriend whose mother tongue wasn't mine, and he spoke Spanish as a second language. I didn't speak his mother tongue, so our relationship was based on me speaking my language and him speaking my language. Many times he didn't know how to say things. He struggled to find the words. One day he said something at random, something that made no sense, something I didn't understand. I asked him what he meant, and he replied, I don't know. I'm just inventioning words. Invencionando, he said in Spanish. So invencionando or inventioning does not exist. That was precisely the word he invented in his answer. His response was a tautology. At that moment, I thought that a boyfriend is like a child. No, sorry, that a foreigner is like a child. At this moment, I think translation or writing is like invencionando or inventioning. No, sorry, I think translation as well as writing is lovely. 10. In this residence, one of the participants in the translation workshop is translating a chapter of my second novel about my mother. She speaks Hindi and English. My novel is in Spanish. The first draft of the translation was done by Google Translate. I asked her then why she chose my writing. She told me that the criterion they use in the workshop is to choose text based on thematic interest, personal closeness, emotion, out of love. Based on the Google Translate version, she's creating a wonderful translation, a version with soul and music. To do so, she interviews me, she needs me, she asks about my mother, about my life. We debate semantic fields, and we have tea together. If that isn't translating, if translating isn't putting your whole self there, then, in my opinion, there is no translation. 11. The other day, it occurred to me that not being able to find a way to say what you want can be a great stroke of luck. Perhaps then you'll find something else to say. Something you don't want to say, but that you can say, that you allow yourself to say. That's the only definition of translator I can think of right now. Or is that the definition of writer? Or are they the same thing? 12. By the way, this text, what I just said, was partially written in Spanish and translated into English using AI. I don't think I lost my soul, though. Thank you.
Thank you for these truly dazzling presentations, which went on a bit longer, and so I have secured permission from the library staff for our question and answer session to go a bit over what we usually do. And while Lindsay's getting ready to come to you with the questions, I want to quickly tell you about some upcoming events. Join us at the Shambha House tonight at 5 o'clock for a reading by Ikram Basra from Pakistan, Hayukin Michaela Kwan from South Korea. This is Shambha House is located at 430 North Clinton Street. Tomorrow at 2:30, as John mentioned, we have the panel series, Sense of Place, with several IWP writers. On Sunday, Kazem Ali will be reading at Prairie Lights at 3:30 p.m. as part of his Idea Cordelia Beam Distinguished Lectureship, visiting lectureship. And he will be joined by Gigi Al-Sana from Saudi Arabia, Yuyuan Lan from Hong Kong, and Blanca Bersail from the Spanish Creative Writing Program. And all of these events are part of the Iowa City Book Festival. And so with that, I'll open it up to questions.
Good afternoon. My name is Nuan Abu Isa. You talked about the word and how it's hard to write the word. In Christianity, they called Jesus the Word, and that is, I guess, he spoke in Aramaic first, and then there was many translations to his ideas. In Arabic, I guess, and the Quran was written in Arabic, and it was mandated that people do pray in Arabic to keep the language as it is, and it's preserved that way. The Arabic language can invent many words. Each verb has 10 forms, for example, and the invention of the Arabic is very... And do you see that there's lots of changes going through religious translation or changes over time?
You're asking me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, because at least in biblical tradition, you have updated translations that seek to use the contemporary language, whether that was, the 3rd century kind of canonical assembly of the books of the Bible, or the translation of the Bible from the original text, the original languages, into Greek, into all the other languages, versus the Quran, where there is a myth of canonicity, which is not true, because in the early days, it was an oral document, it was recited, and there was a moment at which a decision was made. It was during the 3rd caliphate of the Rashidun, like the Sunni caliphs, where the caliph at the time, whose name was Osman, or Uthman in Arabic, decided that there should only be one version. And so he collected all of the variants and burned them and created that was the definitive canonical version. But just like the assembly of the Bible in 300 years after the events that it actually depicted, there's like all the provenance issues around the gospel. Those same, and there's a robust scholarship around it, that same kind of exegesis doesn't exist on the Muslim side. It's sort of like, you just agree this is the definitive book, as if this is the word of God, like as it was spoken in the cave, when we don't know any of that, because this too was many years after, and the people who had memorized it and recited it in different ways, and also the order. It's not the order of revelation. It's not the historical order. It's a canonical assembled order. So then this notion of like, we think these sacred texts are sacred cows, that we can't interrogate how they actually assembled and how they came to be written down in the first place. And all of them have histories, you know. In non-Abrahamic traditions, you're allowed to ask these questions. In the not Judeo, we're going to leave them out because they act in the Jewish intellectual tradition. There's a lot of argument about stuff like this, and they talk about everything. But in the Christian and Muslim tradition, somehow you're supposed to say like, this is the word of God. In the Christian tradition, it's patently untrue because everybody knows that there's a million different versions of the Bible and translated from all these different languages and all these different times and come through Greek and come through this side and that side. And in the Muslim version, we kind of pretend it's not true. It's true, but like the dirty secret is that it isn't. So it's a hard question to answer. Yeah.
What a brilliant answer.
Thank you. I like to think so.
I think Usha was here next.
As always, your comments really make us get inspired every Friday, so thank you for that. I have a two-part question. So as a translator, who do you think you're responsible for? Is it to the original author? And would it be easier if the original author was dead?
Yeah, sure.
Who wants to take that on?
I don't one of you. I have something to say, but I'll wait.
Okay.
I always have something to say.
Yeah.
I can tell. We're happy to hear from all
You're getting
three
that
on this
idea.
one.
I think you have to respect the original, but you also have to deliver a version for the public that's going to read it. So you're playing with both hands, I think. And if I had to choose one side, I kind of choose the reader, just a little bit. If I have to tweak some things, just to make a more understandable and closer version.
As a writer, I don't need to be dead. If some of my writing is translated into a language that I don't know, and I mean, one thing is into English, for example, but to a language that is totally foreign to me, that is enough to be a part out of that. And in that sense, I think that translation is like an act of faith. You have to believe on someone.
I just want to add that those are great answers. One thing that I would add is that when you are translating, for me anyways, it's also bringing something into the new language. It's bringing those poetries into the new language. It's for literature in English that I'm translating, Sohrab Saperi or Ananda Devi from French. Like I want that to be part of American poetry, their work to be a part of American poetry. Yeah.
This question is for Kazim and Tomas. Florencia talked about the music in the language. And I know that this is true because I'm reading it's my foot that starts picking up the beat, 4x4 or whatever. So my question is, in your translations, do you feel the music of the language? Is it something that you can carry from the original language into the language that you're translating? Is there the music there?
What do you think? You want to try?
I remember when I started translating, I read an essay by an Argentine author and translator called Marcelo Cohen, and he's great. And he talked a lot about the rhythm and the music and the sound. And that kind of obsessed me at the beginning because I couldn't do it. It was really hard. Then I learned that I think you can divide a translation. I'm simplifying a lot, but you have the meaning and the music, the rhythm. I think the meaning comes first, and then you have to reproduce some of the music or the rhythm. Probably you can try to pick words that sound kind of similarly. Sometimes you have options, sometimes you don't. And I try to keep the structure of the sentences, though sometimes in Spanish you have to turn things around, but still the length, the punctuation, etc. I try to keep that. But I think the meaning comes first, and then you can try to do whatever you can do with the sound of it.
Yeah, and I think it's impossible. And it's each translator's kind of choice to try. I once listened to Jed Detman, who is a scholar of Emily Dickinson, give a talk on Dickinson as translated into other languages to see who could kind of follow the rhythm. And the language that in his talk, the language that he posited had the closest to Dickinson's rhythm was Dickinson translated into Mandarin, as opposed to Dickinson translated to Italian or French or any European language, or German that might be closer to Dickinson's own language, but that the prosodic qualities of Mandarin language and poetry was the closest to Dickinson's rhythms. And he recited in the talk, and it was we were all pretty much yeah, he's kind of right. Dickinson in Chinese, if you want the rhythm of Dickinson, you have to listen to Dickinson in Chinese. So I think it's just a good example that if you look at the selected poems of a Transtromer that Robert Haas, I think, edited, where he did as a Transtromer done by 7 or 8 different translators of Transtromer, and you realize oh wow, even Transtromer doesn't sound like Transtromer. It depends on if it's Mae Swenson or if it's Robert Fulton or whoever's doing it. Everyone's kind of bringing their own, or Robert Bly or whoever, they're bringing their own sense of rhythm to try to imitate that. In some way, that quality, the original, what you're talking about, which is when Emily Wilson did the Iliad and the Odyssey, she said, okay, in the original it's dactylic hexameters, that's not going to sound so melodious in English, but hey, iambic pentameter is going to sound great in English, so I'm going to do the Iliad and the Odyssey in iambic pentameter, and then it's going to sound to an audience that understands English, it will sound akin to, not but akin to what it might have sounded like to a Greek audience hearing the predominant rhythm of that language.
Yeah. I love that. I love that answer, and it brings to mind in John Felstiner's brilliant biography of Paul Celan. He looks at some of Celan's translations. Celan wrote in German largely, though he also wrote in Romanian early in his career. His translations of Dickinson from German into French, his translations of Dickinson into German. Mm-hmm. And then he retranslated them. Mm-hmm. And when you read the retranslations, you realized, oh, these are Paul Celan poems. It was entirely his music that he was capturing.
Yeah. And he's another person, great example of someone to read 6 or 7 different translations of Paul Celan. The same poem, and you can find them because he's widely translated enough. You can get what is it? I forget her name. Catherine Washburn. Is it Washburn? Felstiner, Hamburger, Pierre Joris,
Heather McHugh and her husband.
Heather McHugh, and you find the same poem though, of all. And then you read that poem by David Young, and you read all of them, and you're like, oh yeah, there's this translation racket is really, because they sound really different from each other. Yeah.
I think we had a.
So this question is for Tomas and for Florencia. It is?
Yeah, we can.
Kazim Ali gave this very elegant account of trying to enrich English with words like chic and azam. Chic is a great example. Food and clothing. I'm thinking about the reverse direction. How do you feel and how do you deal with the avalanche of English as it penetrates, attacks, invades, floods? Other languages, Spanish may have a better defense mechanism, possibly because of Latin or something, but I am thinking about many other languages where the speed of change requires or seems to be pressuring the wholesale absorption of English. And whether yeah, there we go. That's the question.
I can think of many things, but if you speak of Spanish, for example, you have to speak of Spain, Colombia, Chile, Argentina. They all sound different in a way, and they all have different idiosyncrasies, ideas. And for example, in Spain, they don't use any English words. They translate everything, at least as far as I know. I don't know, I think, for example, in Mexico, they probably adopted a lot of English words. In Argentina, not so much, but there are a lot too. So when I'm translating, there are some words that are already replaced the originals, or maybe they don't have a translation. So those I use. But if they have a translation, even if it sounds a little weirder, I try to keep it in Spanish. But again, there are some words that have been totally adopted, and that's fine.
Yeah, as I said, I have been living in Spain for many years, and I was born in Argentina. And yeah, it's true. In Spain, I don't know if I should say we. We or they say Spiderman, for example. No, I mean, sometimes it's the word in English, but with a Spanish pronunciation. Spiderman. Oh. Spiderman is a Spiderman.
Oh, I see, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
So sometimes it's something in the middle. It's not to translate it into Spanish, could be, but sometimes it's that thing to read it phonetically. Yeah? This is really annoying for me that I was born in Argentina. Yeah.
One of the explanations for this is because in Spain they have a tendency to
double the movies.
They rephrase the sound, it's doubling. And in Latin America, at least in Argentina, we're used to watch them with subtitles, so we listen to English all the time. In Spain, they have been because of Franco, etc.
Yeah, exactly. It's a long story that we all know. And then I don't know if I am going far from your question, but I have to do every day with myself the exercise to translate my speaking into, I mean, it's something that maybe I do it unconscious, but it's not the same as Tomas said. It's not the same Spanish we speak in Latin America, and even into Latin America there are many differences rather than Spain. So, and I have to deal with that when I write, for example. I all the time I have to choose the word that I want to use it, because the clothes and the food, for example, the fruits, the name of the fruits in Spain are completely different than the name of the fruits in Argentina. And when I am writing a novel, I never know which one I should use, which one I should choose. And this is something that makes me, I find myself into a problem with that.
Just to add one thing, it didn't happen to me, but I know of some friends that published books in Argentina and then in Spain, and the editions in Spain have been translated. Yeah, they changed some words.
Yeah, there is changing a lot nowadays. I mean, yeah, there is a new like tendency. No.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I don't like
Okay. No, I mean that try to respect the not to translate.
I like
so
that.
you like, yeah,
The
you like
regional,
it. I know.
the regional different,
Yeah.
the different Spanishes. And there are different Englishes too, honestly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No.
I think it used to be worst. That's my point. And now it's the publishing companies are like more conscious about that and trying to respect a little bit more.
I just want to make one last comment about this issue, because it's when English becomes a barrier or becomes a mediating point. So, for example, in India, a lot of the writers who are writing in not in Hindi or English feel like they have to be either translated into English in order to be taken seriously as a writer if they're writing in Telugu or Kannada or any of the various other languages on the subcontinent. And that the translation that happens is not going to happen if you're a Tamil writer, for example. Your work might not necessarily be translated into Marathi directly. It'll be translated to English. And then the Marathi version will be translated from the English version. So that's when it starts to become a little complicated. The implications are different. On the other hand, the English itself is very different. I mean, there are different Englishes, like you can say British English and American English. I mean, it might be just the instance of spelling and some words and slangs. But when you start talking about Indian English or Scottish English or other kinds of English, those differences are more significant. And you can hold a conversation with someone who's really speaking like, I mean, most Indian people know how to code switch and speak standard English, but if you're speaking to some Indian person who's really talking Indian English, you as a US American person might not be able to follow the conversation, even though it's the same language, you know? Yeah.
That's brilliant. I think we had time for one last question. There was a question up here, Julieta.
So
It's on. Yeah.
so this is just like a translation question. If you are translating something and and if the thing you're translating from has a pop culture reference in its original language, how do you translate that to the new language so it's understood by readers who might not get that reference?
What a good question. Yeah.
That's a good question.
Who wants to take this on first? I'd love to hear from all of you.
I kind of talk about it on my text. It depends on the case. I try not to avoid footnotes because I think they're annoying. I just want the text to flow. And there are many pop references that can't be understood maybe in Spanish, coming at least from here. But sometimes you have to add something. The footnote is like my last option. Sometimes I use it. And sometimes you can add a little word or something that will explain, or not explain, but clarify the meaning of what you're talking about. For example, here they use a lot of brands names for products. And many of them are not known maybe in Argentina. So you have to maybe add the word, like the substantive before the brand. So it depends on every case.
You have to trust your reader too. Sometimes they're going to just learn something new.
Yeah.
A footnote's not like such a terrible thing. I don't know. It should be okay. I think about not necessarily pop cultural references, but just specific things like red is a bridal color in India. And so if a bride wears red, it's normal if someone's wearing red in a story, versus here where, that it has a different valence, the color has a different valence. So there's just ways where you translate it and you include a little note, or the text itself might teach you. You might say the dress, maybe the word in the original language is dress, but you translate it as bridal dress, so that someone who's reading it knows, even though she's wearing a red dress, the fact that she's wearing a red dress means she's a bride, You cheated a little bit in the translation, but it becomes clear. Yeah.
as a reader, well, in Argentina, we had to read a lot of Spanish translations. We grew up reading Spanish translations. And one thing that I always remember is in many books that when the character is going to the post office, it always says it's going to, well, in Spanish, of course, but it's going to Correos, because Correos is the name of the post office in Spain. And I always wonder myself why it doesn't say it's going to the post office, why I need the specific name, the specific brand of something so related just with Spain, and I have to read that from Argentina. And I think it's related with which one is the hegemonic language, and this is another very big discussion.
Wonderful to end this discussion at the post office. And a reminder that you can find the writers' presentations as well as their biographies and samples of their work online. And do come to join us this afternoon at 5 o'clock at Shambaugh House. Thank you all. Another round.
No, my grandmother. I'm a quarter Iranian.
Okay, but you've lived here all in Iowa for religion?
No, I grew up in London and Canada.
Oh,
In
wow.
California now.
Jonathan, pleased to meet you. How long have you lived in Iowa?
A day.
How many days?
I'm just visiting.
So
I just came here yesterday. I'm just visiting this week.
oh, wow.